Sarah Elizabeth Burton was born on February 22, 1990, in Joplin, Missouri. She was bright, charismatic, and full of potential. From an early age, she showed signs of academic promise and personal charm. Teachers placed her in gifted programs, and by high school, she was not only excelling in her classes but also making her mark as a cheerleader at Joplin High. To those who knew her then, Sarah was destined for something greater, a young woman full of ambition and possibility. But as is too often the case, life introduced obstacles she wasn't prepared to navigate. Beneath the surface of her outward success, Sarah began a long and difficult struggle with substance abuse that would eventually derail her future and place her on a path that led to tragedy. After high school, Sarah's life slowly began to unravel. Recreational drug use turned into something darker and more consuming. Methamphetamine entered her life, and before long, it became the center of it. Her addiction eventually led to run-ins with the law, including a conviction in 2010 that landed her in prison. Her time behind bars didn't define her, but it certainly changed her. When she was released, she returned to Joplin with new determination, and an even deeper love for the two young boys she was now raising. Sarah's children became her reason to fight. They were her tether to a life she wanted to rebuild. Despite relapses and the overwhelming weight of addiction, she continued trying to turn things around. By 2018, Sarah was once again living with her parents in Joplin. She had suffered another relapse, but this time there was real momentum behind her recovery. Her family had been working tirelessly to secure her a place in a residential treatment program. There were charges pending against her: drug possession, identity theft, and vehicle theft, but she hadn't missed a single court date. Her attorney had expressed hope that some of the charges might be dropped or reduced. Sarah, for the first time in a long time, believed that a better life was within reach. That belief would be tested on July 16, 2018. Sarah had been staying with a friend that evening, not far from her parents' house. She no longer had a car of her own. 5 days earlier, she had been in a car accident in Pittsburgh, Kansas, which had totaled the used SUV her father had bought for her. With her mobility limited, she depended on friends to get around. That night, sometime after midnight, a friend offered to drive her back home. He dropped her off near the intersection of 10th Street and Rex Avenue, a neighborhood she knew well. It was just a short walk to her parents' home. But Sarah never made it. She left behind her purse. She left behind one of her shoes. Both items were found in the car that dropped her off, which to many suggested she fully intended to return quickly. But that never happened. She vanished into the night, and by the next morning, her family began to sense that something was wrong. At first, there was confusion, not panic. Sarah had occasionally gone off the grid for short periods, especially during difficult times. But by July 20th, after 4 days without a single word, her mother Stephanie reported her missing. That phone call marked the beginning of a search that continues to this day. Joplin police launched a missing persons investigation, starting with those closest to Sarah and retracing her steps from the night she disappeared. Interviews were conducted, locations were checked, flyers were posted around town, and Sarah's face began appearing on social media pages and local news segments. In the early days, police believed Sarah had been last seen near 10th and Rex, the spot where she had been dropped off. That was the starting point for early search efforts. But in September 2018, a new tip changed everything. Through follow-up interviews and a more detailed timeline, authorities learned that Sarah had actually been seen later that morning at a residence on North Pearl Avenue in northwest Joplin. This was a turning point in the investigation. It meant Sarah had indeed made it somewhere after being dropped off, and that someone had seen her alive, perhaps only hours before she disappeared for good. The house on North Pearl Avenue became the primary focus. Police obtained a search warrant and combed through the property in December 2018, nearly 5 months after her disappearance. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Investigators examined the basement, yard, and even adjacent vacant lots. Despite the thorough search, no human remains were found. No physical evidence emerged to confirm what might have happened to Sarah inside or near that home. But law enforcement believed they were getting closer. Just 2 days later, the investigation shifted to Pittsburgh, Kansas, where police executed another search, this time at a rural property tied to someone Sarah may have known. The operation was carried out quietly. Authorities combed through a residence, outbuildings, and surrounding land. This property was searched more than once, indicating that law enforcement believed there was more than a coincidental connection. Sarah's mother later confirmed that police had developed a possible suspect associated with that Kansas address, but no arrest ever followed. Whatever suspicions investigators had, they were either unprovable or unsubstantiated by the evidence at hand. In April 2019, nearly 9 months after Sarah vanished, a major development jolted the case back into the headlines. A narcotics search warrant had been issued for a rural property on Crane Drive in Newton County, Missouri, just south of Joplin. What began as a drug bust quickly shifted into something more significant. Police reported that during the course of the search, they discovered evidence that connected the location to the ongoing investigation into Sarah Burton's disappearance. The property, previously linked to criminal activity and believed to be frequented by known associates of Sarah, became the center of a massive operation. The Joplin Police Department, the Newton County Sheriff's Office, the Missouri State Highway Patrol, and the FBI worked together to search the site. They explored every inch of the house and the surrounding land. A pond on the property was drained, and dive teams were deployed to search for submerged evidence. Items were removed from the residence, and samples were collected for forensic analysis. Authorities were tight-lipped about what exactly they had found, but their actions spoke volumes. They described the site as a potential crime scene and sent the recovered materials to FBI labs for testing. Media coverage swelled. The people of Joplin watched closely, hoping for a resolution. But no body was found. No one was arrested, and while law enforcement hinted at progress, they shared no details with the public. It was a familiar and frustrating pattern, one that had repeated itself multiple times over the course of the investigation. On May 29, 2019, the FBI Kansas City Division formally announced a reward of up to $5,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for Sarah's disappearance. Her profile was added to the FBI's missing persons registry, and her case was now backed by the resources and reach of federal law enforcement. The reward offer was shared widely across social media, prompting a fresh round of tips and speculation. Investigators hoped the money would encourage someone to come forward, but as the summer wore on, no breakthrough emerged. July 16, 2019, marked 1 year since Sarah was last seen. Her family organized a candlelight vigil at Mercy Park in Joplin to honor her memory and renew public attention. Dozens attended. They held photos of Sarah, lit candles, and whispered prayers into the dusk. Sarah Burton gave a short but powerful statement to the press, thanking the community for standing by them and begging anyone with information to come forward. The pain in her voice was unmistakable. Her daughter had been missing for a full year, and they were still no closer to knowing why. In August 2019, another search was conducted, this time near 10th and Rex, the original drop-off point. Volunteers from a local search and rescue group joined law enforcement in combing through a vacant lot and nearby brush. Again, no new evidence was found. The soil yielded no secrets. The silence remained. Sarah's case was no longer just a missing persons investigation. It had become a haunting mystery that encapsulated the community's heartbreak. There were so many things about her disappearance that didn't make sense. Her plans to enter treatment, her love for her children, her willingness to face her legal troubles. All signs pointed to someone who had not given up, who had every intention of rebuilding her life. By the end of 2019, more than 150 leads had been investigated. Police had followed tips across Missouri, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Several persons of interest had been identified, and multiple properties had been searched with forensic teams and cadaver dogs. Yet the central questions remained unanswered. What happened to Sarah Burton in the early morning hours of July 17, 2018? And who was responsible? The theory that Sarah had voluntarily disappeared was no longer taken seriously. Law enforcement, her family, and the community at large agreed, something terrible had happened to her. Whether she had been murdered or held against her will, whether her death had been intentional or accidental, no one could say. But the absence of evidence only deepened the fear that whatever had happened had been carefully concealed. As the second year of the investigation approached, Sarah's name became something more than just a headline. She became a symbol, for missing women, for overlooked victims, for families who endure without answers. Her story continued to circulate online, in true crime forums, local media, and awareness campaigns. And her family continued to speak out, to fight for her memory, and to refuse the idea that her disappearance would become just another cold case. The start of 2020 brought no breakthroughs in Sarah Burton's case. By then, nearly 18 months had passed since she vanished in the early morning hours of July 17, 2018. The frustration among investigators, family, and community members was palpable. The searches, the interviews, and the evidence collection had all built toward moments that felt promising, only to fall short of resolution. Each new year added another layer of grief and exhaustion for the people closest to Sarah, but none of them were prepared to give up. Her face remained on flyers, her name remained in the headlines, and her memory remained firmly anchored in the hearts of those still searching for answers. Even as media coverage slowed, the investigation itself did not. The Joplin Police Department kept Sarah's case open and active. Detectives continued to follow up on tips, many of which came through quietly, some anonymous, some secondhand, and others based purely on rumor. Some tips pointed to specific people in the community known to associate with criminal elements, while others named obscure properties in rural areas of Jasper and Newton counties. But time after time, the tips either failed to produce actionable leads or led to previously searched locations. The evidence never stacked high enough to justify an arrest. Law enforcement kept reviewing the case file, hoping that new eyes or new science might reveal what had been missed. By the third anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, the case had become a defining wound in the city of Joplin. On July 16, 2021, Sarah's family released a powerful open letter to the public. It was not a media stunt or a legal plea. It was a cry from the heart of two parents who had lived with a terrible absence for over 1,000 days. 3 long years later, we are still living the nightmare of not knowing what happened or where she is, the letter read. 2 innocent little boys are put to bed every night, not by their mommy. Someone, or many, knows what or where. Please help us bring Sarah to a final resting place. That evening, a vigil was held once again at Mercy Park. The crowd was smaller than in past years, but the feeling of resolve was no weaker. Friends, extended family, neighbors, and a few strangers gathered with candles and prayers, refusing to let Sarah's story be forgotten. Her sons were growing older, and with each passing year, they began asking deeper questions. Stephanie and Ron Burton did their best to explain the unexplainable, to keep Sarah's memory present in their grandchildren's lives while shielding them from the darkest parts of the truth. The boys would remember the warmth of her hugs, the sound of her laugh from videos and family stories. But without answers, the most painful part remained: they didn't know what had taken her away. Through 2022 and into 2023, Sarah's name resurfaced regularly in local media. Periodic stories reminded the public that the case was unsolved. Each time human remains were found anywhere within 100 miles, the Burton family braced for news. More than once, remains were submitted for forensic comparison, and each time, they came back negative. Sarah was not among the unidentified dead. It was both a relief and a torment. They still had hope that she was out there, but they still had no peace. The Joplin Police Department remained consistent in their message: the case was not cold. Officers continued to work it as an active investigation. They had never stopped chasing down tips, and they reiterated the reward, first issued by the FBI in 2019, was still in place. That reward, originally $5,000, was doubled in 2024 to $10,000. It was an effort to stir the conscience of someone who might be holding onto a secret. Investigators were clear: the money was not for speculation. It was for credible information that could lead to arrest and conviction. That word choice, conviction, reflected what authorities had believed for years. Sarah hadn't left on her own. She had been harmed, likely murdered, and someone was responsible. As more time passed, public theories about what happened to Sarah began to harden. The idea that she had voluntarily vanished was dismissed by nearly everyone. Sarah had not taken money, identification, or personal belongings. She had no car, no cell phone, and no reason to run. Her legal problems, while real, were manageable and showing signs of resolution. Her devotion to her children was, by all accounts, unwavering. She had checked on them constantly, even during the worst of her addiction. To go silent in a way that left them behind, without so much as a goodbye, was completely out of character. Law enforcement and family both settled on the theory of foul play early in the investigation. But exactly what had happened, and who was responsible, remained elusive. One possibility considered was that Sarah had overdosed while in the company of others, and instead of calling for help, those individuals had panicked and disposed of her body. That theory would account for the lack of a crime scene, but investigators needed more than speculation. Another theory suggested Sarah had been deliberately harmed, perhaps over a drug debt or in retaliation for something. The presence of gang activity in certain areas of Joplin, and Sarah's associations with people in that orbit, made this possibility difficult to ignore. In particular, the rural property on Crane Drive, searched in April 2019, remained a focal point for those who followed the case closely. That property had previously been associated with a local gang called the Joplin Honkies. While Sarah herself had no known ties to the gang, people she knew reportedly did. The house on Crane Drive had been raided in 2016 during an unrelated investigation involving a fugitive. That same location, searched again during Sarah's investigation, was described by Sheriff Chris Jennings as a possible crime scene. Items were taken from the property and sent for forensic testing, but the results of those tests were never made public. Even with these strong suspicions, law enforcement never named a suspect. They did not have the kind of concrete evidence, DNA, eyewitnesses, confessions, that would allow them to pursue charges. The community grew increasingly frustrated. If law enforcement believed they knew where Sarah had been, and possibly who had been with her, why hadn't anyone been held accountable? The answer, though unsatisfying, was straightforward. Without a body or definitive proof, the law required more than belief. It required facts that could survive the scrutiny of court. As time wore on, Sarah's name appeared less frequently in the news, but the Burton family's commitment never wavered. They continued to speak at missing persons events, to share updates online, and to appeal to the conscience of those who might know something. They understood the dynamics at play. People who existed on the margins of society, people who might have been with Sarah that night, often distrusted law enforcement, feared retaliation, or believed speaking out might implicate them. The Burtons begged for mercy, not revenge. They asked for truth. Their greatest hope, they said, was not a conviction or even an apology. It was to find Sarah, to bring her home, to give her a resting place where her sons could say goodbye. That simple act, knowing where she was, had become the most important thing in their lives. They held on to stories of other families who had waited 5, 10, even 20 years for answers. They prayed they would not become one of them. In the meantime, Sarah's case became a quiet presence in the lives of those around her. The police department still listed her case as active. The FBI still maintained her missing person poster online. Her face, smiling and youthful, remained fixed in time. Friends occasionally posted memories on social media. Strangers, moved by the story, wrote poems or letters of support. Vigil events were held less often, but each one carried the same theme: we are still looking. We are not giving up. By 2025, Sarah Burton had been missing for more than 6.5 years. Her name had become more than a mystery, it had become a symbol. A symbol of how addiction can render people vulnerable. A symbol of how women on the edge of recovery are often left unprotected. A symbol of how systems can fail, and how silence can keep killers safe. But most of all, she remained a daughter, a mother, a sister. A woman who had been trying to change her life when someone stole her future. As of this writing, the $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible for Sarah's disappearance remains unclaimed. The Joplin Police Department and the FBI urge anyone with information to come forward. Tips can be submitted anonymously, and law enforcement continues to stress that no detail is too small. They are still working the case, still following up on leads, and still waiting for the break that could bring Sarah home. Her story is not just about what happened to her. It's also about what has not happened. No confession, no charges, no grave, only the silence of those who know, and the determination of those who keep asking. Sarah Burton was last seen on July 17, 2018, in Joplin, Missouri. She was 28 years old. She stood 5 feet, 7 inches tall, weighed approximately 160 pounds, and had light brown hair and blue eyes. She left behind a family who loves her, 2 young sons who still ask about her, and a city that cannot forget her name. If you know anything at all, about what happened that night, her family still waits to hear from you. Because somewhere in Joplin, or maybe not far from it, someone knows the truth. And it is time to speak.